Your debt is $10 million, Zuri. But I am an impotent man, so your virtue is safe. Just stay in my bed for one night to fool my enemies, and you are free. Nam Ji-hoon, the cold-blooded Korean mafia boss, whispered the lie against Zuri's neck, his voice like velvet over a blade. Desperate to save her family, Zuri agreed, believing the rumors that the powerful underworld leader was a broken man who couldn't touch her. But the moment the bedroom door locked, the broken man vanished. In the darkness, the Korean mafia boss's eyes burned with a terrifying hunger. The impotence was a lethal ruse, a trap designed to lure the only woman he ever obsessed over into his cage. By morning, Zuri was no longer just a maid, she was the bearer of the mafia's secret heirs. 9 months later, Ji-hoon bursts into a hidden clinic, blood on his hands and fury in his heart, only to find an empty cradle and a note pinned to a blood-stained pillow. It read, "You hunted a lamb, Ji-hoon. But you woke up a lioness. Find us if you dare, but remember, I know the secret that will burn your empire to the ground." The hunt has just begun. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, mirroring the storm brewing inside Zuri's chest. Across the room, Nam Ji-hoon sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, looking every bit the king of Seoul's underworld. He was elegant, dangerous, and, according to every whisper in the city, completely broken. "You've read the contract, Zuri," Ji-hoon said, his voice a low, melodic hum that made the hair on her arms stand up. "My enemies believe I am weak. They believe an old injury took my ability to produce an heir. If they see a woman like you, beautiful, defiant, and untouched, leaving my room tomorrow morning, they will think I have recovered. My power will be absolute, and your family's debt will be erased." Zuri gripped the hem of her maid's uniform, her knuckles white. She was a medical student, a girl who believed in science and facts, not mafia fairy tales. But the facts were grim, her father was in a cage, and the only key was held by the man in front of her. One night, she whispered, her voice trembling. "No touching. You stay on your side, and I stay on mine." That was the agreement. Ji-hoon stood up, his tall frame cutting a terrifying silhouette against the lightning-streaked sky. He walked toward her with a slow, predatory grace that didn't look like the movement of a broken man. He stopped just inches away, the scent of expensive sandalwood and cold rain clinging to him. He reached out, his fingers hovering just a hair's breadth from her cheek. "You have my word," he murmured. "I am an impotent man, remember? You are as safe in my bed as you would be in a church." Zuri let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She followed him into the master suite, a room that felt more like a golden cage than a bedroom. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut with a sound that felt final, like a gavel hitting a block. As she lay on the edge of the silk sheets, staring at the ceiling, she told herself it was just 12 hours. 12 hours of awkward silence, and then she would be free. She heard the shower running, then the sound of Ji-hoon moving in the dark. But as the clock struck midnight, the air in the room changed. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy with a sudden, suffocating heat. Zuri felt the mattress shift. A large, warm hand suddenly clamped over her waist, pulling her back against a chest that was solid, powerful, and very much alive. "The world is full of lies, Zuri," Ji-hoon's voice hissed in her ear, no longer cold, but burning with a hunger that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "And the lie of my impotence was the best one I ever told." Zuri tried to scream, but his lips were already there, stealing her breath. In that moment, she realized the terrifying truth, she hadn't traded her debt for freedom. She had walked directly into the lair of a wolf who had been waiting years to claim her. And the secret she would discover by morning would change the course of the Korean underworld forever. The golden light of the morning sun felt like a lie as it crawled across the silk sheets. Zuri pulled the covers to her chest, her heart heavy with the realization that the impotent man she had trusted was a shadow she didn't know at all. Across the room, Nam Ji-hoon stood by the window, already dressed in a sharp, charcoal suit. He looked as calm as a frozen lake, sipping coffee as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis during the night. "The debt is gone, Zuri," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "You should be smiling. Your family is safe." "I did what you asked," Zuri replied, her voice trembling. "Now let me go. I have a life to get back to. I have medical school." Ji-hoon turned slowly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He didn't look like a man ready to say goodbye. "I've decided your medical skills are too valuable to waste on a public hospital. From today, you aren't just a maid. You are my personal medical consultant. You will live here, under my protection, and eat at my table." Zuri sat up, her eyes wide with anger. "That wasn't the deal. I'm not your prisoner, Ji-hoon. I'm leaving." "Are you?" Ji-hoon picked up a small remote and pressed a button. A hidden screen on the wall flickered to life. Zuri gasped as she saw a live video feed of a prison hallway. The camera moved into a cell where an older man sat on a thin cot, staring blankly at the wall. "Dad?" Zuri whispered, leaning toward the screen. "I didn't just pay the debt he owed to the banks, Zuri," Ji-hoon said, his tone casual. "I bought the entire private facility where he is being held. Every guard, every lock, and every meal is now on my payroll. I own the ground he sleeps on and the air he breathes." The air left Zuri's lungs. She looked from the screen back to the man standing before her. He wasn't just a mafia boss, he was a puppeteer who had pulled every string before she even knew she was in the play. Ji-hoon walked toward the bed, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. The scent of sandalwood surrounded her again, but this time it felt like a warning. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch light but possessive. "I am a very generous man to those who stay," he whispered, his breath hot against her skin. "But my patience has a price. If you walk out of that door, the kitchen in that prison closes forever. If you leave this room, your father never eats again." Days turned into weeks, and the penthouse became a cage lined with gold. Zuri was surrounded by the finest silks and the most expensive food, but every time she looked at the heavy steel doors, she saw her father's face behind bars. Nam Ji-hoon was rarely home, but his presence was everywhere, in the silent guards at the elevators and the cameras that followed her every move. Zuri was not a woman who gave up easily. She was a medical student, trained to look for symptoms and find the root of a problem. If Ji-hoon wanted her to be his medical consultant, she would do exactly that, but she would use her knowledge to find his weakness. She began to watch him closely during their tense dinners. She noticed the slight tremor in his hand when he reached for a glass of water and the way his eyes looked sunken and tired when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening, while Ji-hoon was away at a high-level meeting, Zuri managed to bypass the electronic lock on his private study. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she searched through his mahogany desk. She found a small, hidden safe behind a painting. Using the date of the assassination attempt she had heard the servants whisper about, she tried the code. The door clicked open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or golden bars. Instead, there was a single, thick medical file and a row of small, unlabeled vials. Zuri's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. As she read the chemical analysis of the liquid in the vials, her blood ran cold. Ji-hoon hadn't just lied about being impotent, he was actively making himself sick. The vials contained a rare, slow-acting toxin that mimicked the symptoms of a failing nervous system. He was poisoning himself in small doses, day after day, just to maintain the ruse that he was a broken man. He was sacrificing his own body to make his rivals think he was no longer a threat. Zuri stared at the data on the page, her medical mind calculating the damage. Her anger at being trapped was suddenly replaced by a terrifying realization. The dosage in the most recent reports was reaching a lethal level. Ji-hoon was playing a game of chicken with his own life, and he was losing. She heard the front door chime and the heavy footsteps of the guards. She quickly shoved the file back and closed the safe, her mind racing. She had been looking for a way to destroy him, but the truth was much worse. Nam Ji-hoon was dying for his ambition, his organs slowly shutting down from the very poison he injected to stay powerful. As he walked into the room, looking paler than ever, Zuri felt a chill of pure dread. She was the only person in the world who knew he was killing himself, and she was the only one with the medical knowledge to save him. The grand crystal ballroom was filled with the glitter of diamonds and the hushed whispers of Seoul's most powerful people. Zuri wore a deep emerald gown that Ji-hoon had chosen for her, but she felt like a ghost walking among the living. The air felt thin, and the smell of expensive perfumes made her stomach roll in waves of nausea. Beside her, Nam Ji-hoon looked like a king, though Zuri could see the slight paleness of his skin that told her the poison was still working through his veins. As the orchestra began a slow waltz, the room suddenly started to spin. The bright chandeliers blurred into streaks of white light. Zuri reached out for the edge of a table, but her fingers found only empty air. Before she could call out, the world went black. Ji-hoon caught her before she hit the marble floor. For the first time in his life, the cold, calculated Korean mafia boss felt a surge of pure terror. He didn't care about the hundreds of eyes watching them or the rumors his reaction would start. He lifted her into his arms, his heart racing against his ribs. He wasn't thinking about a consultant or a prisoner. He was thinking about Zuri. "Get the car. Now," he roared, his voice shaking the glass ornaments on the tables. Within an hour, Zuri was lying in a private hospital wing owned by the syndicate. A doctor with graying hair and a calm smile performed the tests while Ji-hoon paced the hallway like a caged tiger. What Ji-hoon didn't know was that this doctor was on the payroll of his greatest rival. The doctor walked out, his face pulled into a mask of false sadness. "Mr. Nam, I have grave news. Zuri has a rare and deadly blood disease. It is aggressive. Without constant treatment that only my clinic can provide, she won't last the year." Ji-hoon felt as though he had been punched. The thought of a world without Zuri, without her defiance and her brilliant mind, was a darkness he couldn't face. He sat by her bed, clutching her hand as if he could hold her soul in place. Later that night, when the hospital was silent and Ji-hoon had stepped away to make a call, Zuri sat up. She felt weak, but her medical curiosity was stronger than her fear. She saw her chart sitting on the rolling table at the foot of her bed. She pulled it toward her, her eyes scanning the complex lab results that the doctor thought she wouldn't understand. Her breath hitched. She checked the numbers again, her heart stopping. There was no blood disease. The doctor had lied to keep her a prisoner for Ji-hoon's enemies. But there was something else in the report, a specific hormone level that was off the charts. Zuri pressed her hand to her flat stomach, her eyes filling with tears. She wasn't dying. She was pregnant with twins. Zuri decided to use the doctor's lie as her greatest weapon. If Nam Ji-hoon believed she was dying, he would let his guard down. She began to act weaker than she really was, coughing into silk handkerchiefs and spending long hours in the library. Ji-hoon, haunted by the thought of losing her, stopped acting like a captor and began acting like a man desperate to save her. He gave her more freedom, allowed her to walk in the private gardens, and stopped questioning her every move. Zuri used every second of that freedom to prepare for a life far away from the Korean mafia. She began small, skimming cash from the household accounts he had opened in her name. With her medical knowledge, she knew how to access the dark web to find a forger. She spent her nights secretly creating new identities for herself and the two tiny lives growing inside her. She forged hospital records and exit visas, hiding them deep inside the lining of a medical bag she kept under the floorboards of the closet. Her heart pounded every time Ji-hoon entered the room. He was becoming gentler, bringing her rare herbs and checking her temperature with a soft touch that almost made her feel guilty. But then she would remember her father in that cold cell and the poison Ji-hoon used on himself, and her resolve would harden. She couldn't let her children grow up in a world of lies and shadows. The night of her planned escape finally arrived. Ji-hoon was supposed to be at a late-night meeting with his lieutenants. Zuri pulled her bag from the hiding spot and opened it to double-check her documents. She reached for her fake passport, but as she opened the blue cover, her heart nearly stopped. The low-quality, forged passport she had bought was gone. In its place was a high-security, official government passport. She flipped to the first page and gasped. It was her photo, but the name didn't belong to a stranger. It read, Zuri Nam. He had officially registered her as his wife in secret. Every document she had forged had been replaced with real, legal versions, all bearing his last name. He had known about her plan all along. The heavy bedroom door creaked open. Zuri froze, her hands trembling over the bag. The shadow of the Korean mafia boss stretched across the floor, long and intimidating. Nam Ji-hoon leaned against the doorframe, his face unreadable in the moonlight. He wasn't angry, he looked disappointed, as if he had expected her to be a better liar. The jet is fueled and the flight plan is filed, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the room. He stepped into the light, and Zuri saw the glint of a wedding band on his finger that matched the one he had hidden in her bag. He tilted his head, looking at the half-packed suitcase. Tell me, Zuri, where exactly are we going, Mrs. Nam? The silence following Ji-hoon's question was shattered by a deafening explosion. The floor beneath them buckled, and the massive windows of the penthouse blew inward in a shower of deadly glass. Zuri was thrown to the ground, her hands instinctively covering her stomach. Through the smoke and the screams of sirens, she saw Ji-hoon move with the speed of a predator. He didn't run for cover, he lunged toward her, shielding her body with his own just as a second blast rocked the building. Gunfire erupted from the hallway. Ji-hoon pulled a weapon from his waistband, his face a mask of cold fury. Get to the safe room, he roared over the noise. But as he turned to return fire, a hidden marksman on a nearby rooftop found their mark. A high-caliber bullet tore through the air, hitting Ji-hoon squarely in the chest. He collapsed, his blood staining the white marble floor. Panic surged through Zuri, but her medical training took over. She dragged him behind a heavy oak desk while bullets whistled overhead. The guards were holding the line at the door, but Ji-hoon was fading fast. His breathing was shallow and wet. If she didn't act now, he would be dead before the ambulance arrived. I need my bag, she screamed at a guard. She didn't wait for permission. She ripped open his shirt and began the desperate work of stopping the bleed. With steady hands, she used her tools to perform an emergency procedure right there on the floor. As she worked to remove the shrapnel and clean the wound, she noticed something strange. The blood coming from his veins was a dark, oily purple, far worse than it should have been. She looked at the chemical residue around the wound and realized the terrifying truth. The poison she thought Ji-hoon was taking himself wasn't a choice at all. The vials she had found in his safe were the antidote, not the toxin. Ji-hoon wasn't poisoning himself for ambition, someone else had been feeding him the toxin for years to ensure he could never produce an heir. And based on the specific type of chemical, only one person had the access to do it, his own brother, Nam Sang-hoon. Zuri worked for hours in the dim light of the safe room, her hands covered in the blood of the man who had kept her prisoner. She saved his life, but the world felt more dangerous than ever. As the sun began to rise, Ji-hoon's eyes fluttered open. He was weak, but the fire in his gaze had returned. He looked at Zuri, then at her stomach, which she could no longer hide. Before she could pull away, his hand shot out with surprising strength, his fingers locking around her wrist like iron bands. You saved me, he rasped, his voice raw and terrifying. But don't think this changes anything. I saw the medical scans on your phone while you were working. I know about the twins, Zuri. My blood is in them, and they will never leave this house. The penthouse was no longer a palace, it was a fortress under siege. Armed men stood at every corner, and the air smelled of gunpowder and cleaning chemicals. Zuri knew she couldn't wait any longer. Ji-hoon's obsession had turned into a suffocating grip, and his brother's poison was still lurking in the shadows. If she stayed, her twins would be born into a cage of violence. She used her medical knowledge one last time. She mixed a combination of herbs and salts from the kitchen that would cause her to break into a cold sweat and make her heart race dangerously. As the clock struck midnight, Zuri collapsed in the hallway, clutching her stomach and screaming in a way that sounded like pure agony. "The babies!" she cried out as the guards rushed toward her. "Something is wrong. There's too much pain." Ji-hoon appeared at the end of the hall, his face pale with fear. He saw the distress on her face and the way her body trembled. Because he had seen her save his life, he trusted her medical judgment completely. "Call an ambulance," he roared. "If anything happens to them, I will kill everyone in this building." Zuri was lifted onto a stretcher. She kept her eyes closed, pretending to drift in and out of consciousness as she was rushed to a waiting ambulance. She had a plan. Once they reached the hospital, she would use a prearranged exit through the morgue. But as the siren began to wail and the vehicle sped away from the penthouse, she realized something was wrong. The ambulance wasn't headed toward the city hospital. It was turning toward the industrial docks. She sat up, her heart hammering for real this time. "Where are we going?" she demanded. The partition slid open. It wasn't a paramedic sitting in the front seat. It was Nam Sang-hoon, Ji-hoon's brother. He looked at her through the glass with a sickening smile. "My brother is so blinded by his miracle that he didn't check who was driving," he hissed. "He thinks those twins are the future of the Nam family. I think they are a mistake that needs to be erased." Zuri lunged for the door handle, but it was locked from the outside. Sang-hoon pulled a weapon, but before he could aim, a black SUV slammed into the side of the ambulance. It was Ji-hoon's men, or perhaps a rival gang, Zuri couldn't tell. The world turned upside down. The ambulance swerved violently, tires screeching against the wet pavement of the Han River Bridge. The vehicle crashed through the guardrail. Zuri felt the sickening sensation of weightlessness as the heavy van soared into the darkness. There was a deafening roar of twisting metal, followed by a bone-shaking splash as the ambulance hit the freezing water. Cold, dark river water began to pour in through the broken windows, and then, everything went black. 6 months had passed since the night the river swallowed the world. In the heart of Seoul, Nam Ji-hoon had become a ghost of a man. He had burned down rival empires and spent millions searching the dark depths of the Han River, but the divers found only twisted metal. The city whispered that the Korean Mafia boss had lost his mind along with his heirs. He sat in his dark penthouse, staring at an empty emerald dress, convinced that Zuri was gone forever. But hundreds of miles away, in a quiet village hidden by mist and mountains, Zuri was very much alive. She lived in a small, wooden cabin under a fake name, wearing oversized sweaters to hide her heavy, aching belly. Her life was simple now. She spent her days gardening and her nights listening to the wind, always looking over her shoulder. Every time a car drove past, her heart stopped, but the peace of the mountains was the only medicine she had. Her body was tired. Carrying twins was a heavy burden, and the trauma of the crash had left her with a constant, dull pain. One afternoon, the pain became too sharp to ignore. She stumbled into the small village clinic, hoping for a simple checkup. The local doctor, a man with tired eyes and a radio that played constant news, helped her to a chair. As he moved the ultrasound wand over her stomach, his eyes suddenly widened. He looked from the screen to Zuri's face, then back to the dusty television in the corner of his office. The news was showing a missing poster of a beautiful black woman, the woman the Korean Mafia boss was destroying the country to find. Zuri saw the spark of recognition in his eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm just a student. I'm hiding from a dangerous man." The doctor nodded slowly, patting her hand. "Don't worry, child. I know exactly who to call." Zuri felt a wave of relief, thinking he meant the local police or a charity. She walked back to her cabin, unaware that the doctor hadn't called the authorities. He had seen the private bounty poster sent out by Nam Sang-hoon, the brother who wanted the heirs dead. To a poor village doctor, the reward was worth more than a stranger's life. That night, a brutal storm rolled over the mountains. Thunder shook the cabin walls, and Zuri suddenly gasped, clutching a wooden chair. A hot, sharp pain flared through her middle, stronger than anything she had ever felt. Her water had broken. She was alone, miles from help, and her babies were coming early. As she collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, the sound of engines drowned out the thunder. Bright headlights cut through the rain, reflecting off the cabin windows. Zuri dragged herself to the window and felt a chill deeper than the mountain snow. 4 black SUVs had surrounded her home. These weren't the rescue teams of Ji-hoon. These were the hunters. The cabin groaned under the weight of the storm, but the sound of heavy boots on the porch was louder. Zuri pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a scream of agony. Another contraction ripped through her, but she couldn't stay in the bedroom. With every ounce of strength left in her body, she rolled off the floor and crawled toward the small, hidden latch of the potato cellar. She slipped inside and pulled the rug over the trapdoor just as the front door was kicked off its hinges. The cellar was cold and smelled of damp earth, but it was a sanctuary. Above her, she heard the hitmen smashing furniture and shouting in Korean. "Find her. The boss wants the woman and the evidence gone." Zuri lay on a pile of old burlap sacks, her body shaking. She used her medical knowledge to guide her breathing, knowing she had to be silent. If she made a sound, she died. If she stopped pushing, her babies died. In the suffocating darkness, with the enemy walking just inches above her head, Zuri gave birth. First came a tiny, silent boy, then a girl. She quickly wrapped them in her sweater, pulling them to her skin to keep them warm and quiet. By some miracle, the infants stayed still, as if they knew the world outside was a battlefield. Suddenly, the house above erupted into chaos. Gunfire hissed through the air, followed by the heavy thuds of bodies hitting the floor. The screaming stopped, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like lead. Then, a voice broke the quiet, a voice Zuri knew in her marrow. "Zuri!" Nam Ji-hoon roared. He sounded broken, his voice raw with a mix of hope and terror. "Zuri, if you are here, please." Zuri gripped her children tight. She heard him run from room to room, his footsteps frantic. Part of her wanted to scream for him, to be saved by the man she had once feared. But then she remembered the prison, the poison, and the way he had claimed her children as property before they were even born. She saw a small ventilation crawlspace at the back of the cellar that led to the woods. It was a narrow, dangerous path, but it was a path to freedom. Minutes later, Ji-hoon ripped the rug back and flung open the trapdoor. His heart leaped into his throat, seeing the blood and the signs of a struggle. But the cellar was empty. There were no bodies, no babies, and no Zuri. All that remained was a single, soft baby blanket left on the dirt floor. He fell to his knees, his fingers trembling as he picked up a small scrap of paper pinned to the fabric. His eyes blurred as he read the jagged handwriting of the woman he had lost twice. The note read, "You wanted heirs to build your empire, Ji-hoon. But I gave you ghosts. Don't look for us. We don't exist anymore." 1 year had passed, and the world of international business was buzzing with a name that had appeared out of nowhere. In the heart of Lagos, a new pharmaceutical empire had risen, led by a woman the media called the Lioness. She was brilliant, wealthy, and untouchable. She moved through the bright glass halls of her headquarters with a grace that commanded respect from world leaders and billionaires alike. No one knew where she had come from, but everyone knew she held the keys to the most advanced medical patents in the world. That woman was Zuri. She was no longer the frightened medical student or the maid in a silk cage. She had used her medical genius to develop a series of life-saving drugs, building a fortress of wealth that was more powerful than any mafia army. But Zuri wasn't just building a future for her twins, she was dismantling a past that had tried to crush her. In South Korea, Nam Ji-hoon's empire was crumbling. It wasn't falling to bullets or rival gangs, but to numbers on a screen. One by one, his legitimate front companies, the shipping lines and construction firms that funded his underworld activities, were being bought out or forced into bankruptcy. Every time he tried to close a deal, a mystery investor from Africa was already there, outbidding him and cutting off his oxygen. He was losing his grip on the city, and he didn't even know who his enemy was. Ji-hoon sat in his office, looking older and sharper. He had stopped looking for Zuri months ago, convinced by the silence that she had truly become a ghost. He was tired of the shadows. When his assistant brought him a gold-trimmed invitation for a private merger meeting with the mystery CEO of the African pharmaceutical giant, he saw it as his last chance to save his family name. "They want to meet in person, sir," the assistant said. "In the satellite office here in Seoul. They say the CEO has a personal interest in the Nam family assets." Ji-hoon straightened his tie, the cold mask of the Korean mafia boss sliding back into place. He walked into the skyscraper in downtown Seoul, flanked by his guards. He expected to meet an old man or a greedy board of directors. He was ready to fight for his life's work. The heavy mahogany doors of the top-floor suite opened slowly. The office was filled with the scent of sandalwood, a scent he had once loved. A high-backed leather chair turned around slowly. Ji-hoon's heart stopped. Standing there, silhouetted against the Seoul skyline, was the woman he had mourned for a year. She was dressed in a suit that cost more than his car, her hair braided perfectly, and her eyes as cold as the Han River. She didn't look like a ghost, she looked like an executioner. "Hello, Ji-hoon," Zuri said, her voice steady and powerful. "I believe you have some papers to sign." Ji-hoon stood frozen, his breath hitching in his chest. For a moment, the cold mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man who looked like he had seen a miracle. "Zuri," he whispered, stepping forward with his hand outstretched. "You're alive. I knew it. I never stopped looking." His eyes darted to her waist, his voice growing dark and possessive. "Where are they? Where are my children?" He signaled to his guards to move in and surround her, the old instinct to claim and cage her taking over. "You're coming back with me," he commanded, his voice regaining its edge. "I don't care about this company or these games. You belong to the Nam family." Zuri didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She simply pressed a button on her desk. In an instant, the hidden doors around the room slid open. 24 tactical security agents, armed with high-tech equipment that made Ji-hoon's men look like amateurs, flooded the room. The red dots of laser sight settled onto the chests of Ji-hoon and his guards. Ji-hoon's men immediately dropped their weapons, realizing they were completely outmatched. "Sit down, Ji-hoon," Zuri said, her voice like ice. "You are not in a penthouse in Seoul anymore. You are in my world now." Ji-hoon sank into the chair, the shock of her power hitting him harder than any bullet. "How?" he rasped. "How did a maid build all of this in a year?" "I was never just a maid," Zuri replied, tossing a yellowed, dusty document onto the desk. "My father wasn't just a man in debt. 30 years ago, he was a brilliant scientist who started a research firm right here in this city. Your father didn't just lend him money, he staged a coup. He stole my father's patents, framed him for a crime he didn't commit, and built the Nam Empire on a foundation of stolen blood." She leaned forward, her eyes burning with the fire of a daughter seeking justice. "I didn't find this company, Ji-hoon. I took back what was already mine. I used the secrets my father whispered to me in that prison to reclaim his legacy. Every dollar you have, every building you own, belongs to the girl you tried to turn into a puppet." The silence in the room was suffocating. Ji-hoon looked at the document, then at the woman who had completely dismantled his life. He was no longer the hunter, he was the prey. Zuri slid a legal contract across the desk and placed a heavy, gold pen on top of it. On the large screen behind her, a video began to play. It was Ji-hoon's brother, Sang-hoon, tied to a chair, sobbing as he confessed to the poisoning and the hit on the ambulance. "This video goes to the police and the rival families tonight," Zuri said calmly. "Sign over every mafia asset and every piece of property to my foundation. Sign it all away, or I release the video and watch your brother, and your name, burn to ashes." Ji-hoon looked at the pen, then at the video of his brother's betrayal, and finally at the woman he had once thought he owned. The weight of his sins felt like a mountain crushing his chest. Slowly, with a hand that trembled for the first time in his life, he signed the papers. He pushed the documents across the desk, surrendering his empire, his wealth, and his power. He didn't care about the money anymore. "It's yours," he whispered, his voice broken. "All of it. Just, please, Zuri. Let me see them. Let me see my children once before I go." Zuri watched him for a long moment. She saw the hollow look in his eyes and the way his shoulders slumped. She stood up and led him toward a heavy, reinforced door at the back of the office. She opened it, revealing a bright, sunlit playroom separated from them by a thick sheet of bulletproof glass. Ji-hoon pressed his hands against the glass, his breath fogging the surface. On the other side, a little boy and a little girl were playing with wooden blocks. They had Ji-hoon's dark, intense eyes and Zuri's soft curls. They were beautiful, healthy, and happy. Tears pricked Ji-hoon's eyes. This was the miracle he had lied and killed for, and they were right there, just inches away. He tapped lightly on the glass, a small smile breaking through his grief. "Hey there," he murmured, his heart swelling with a strange, painful love. "It's me. I'm here." The children looked up, but they didn't smile back. They looked at Ji-hoon as if he were a stranger, a ghost they didn't recognize. Just then, the door to the playroom opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a simple suit walked in. It was Zuri's head of security, the man who had protected her in the mountains and helped her build her empire. The moment the twins saw him, their faces lit up like sunshine. "Papa," the little girl squealed, dropping her blocks and racing toward him. The little boy followed, giggling as the man scooped them both up into a giant hug. He kissed their foreheads and spun them around, and the room was filled with the sound of their pure, innocent laughter. Ji-hoon felt as if the glass had shattered and pierced his heart. He watched as the man he considered a servant held the heirs of the Nam bloodline. He watched his children look at another man with the love and trust he had never earned. "They don't know who I am," Ji-hoon gasped, his knees finally giving out. He slid down the glass until he was crumpled on the floor. The most feared man in the Korean underworld, the boss who had never bowed to anyone, was now weeping silently on his knees. He hadn't just lost his kingdom, he had been erased from the hearts of his own children. The peace of the moment was shattered by the sound of splintering wood. Nam Sang-hoon, Ji-hoon's brother, had escaped his captors. He burst into the hallway with a crazed look in his eyes and a weapon in his hand. He didn't care about money or power anymore, he only wanted revenge for his ruined life. He leveled the gun at Zuri, his finger tightening on the trigger. "If I can't have the empire, nobody will," he screamed. Time seemed to slow down. Zuri frozen as she looked into the barrel of the gun. But before the bullet could reach her, a shadow blurred across her vision. Ji-hoon, still weak and on his knees, threw himself in front of her. A loud crack echoed through the office, and Ji-hoon gasped as the bullet tore into his shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the floor hard, but he didn't stop. He used his last bit of strength to tackle his brother, holding him down until the security team swarmed the room and dragged the traitor away in chains. Zuri knelt beside Ji-hoon, her hands pressing against his wound. She saw the pain in his eyes, but for the first time, there was no lie in them. He wasn't trying to own her. He had been willing to die just so she and the children could keep breathing. Why? She whispered, her voice cracking. Because, Ji-hoon rasped, a small, tired smile touching his lips. A real king protects his family. He doesn't cage them. Weeks later, the dust had finally settled. The Mafia was no more. Zuri had used the signed papers to dissolve the criminal organization, turning its wealth into schools and hospitals across the world. She sat in the high-backed chair of the chairperson, looking out at the city she now truly owned through her father's legacy. The door opened, and Ji-hoon walked in. He was no longer wearing the expensive, sharp suits of a boss. He wore the simple black uniform of a bodyguard, his arm still in a sling. He had given up his name, his title, and his pride. He spent his days watching over the twins from a distance and standing by the door whenever Zuri held a meeting. He didn't ask for a seat at the table. He was content just to be in the room. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the office, Zuri stood up and walked toward him. She looked at the man who had gone from a monster to a protector. She saw the patient, humble look in his eyes. She reached out and touched his hand, the same hand that had once held her father's prison keys, but now held only a commitment to her safety. She leaned in close, her voice a soft, warm velvet that made his heart skip a beat. "The children asked about you today," she whispered. "And I think it's time they knew the truth." She paused, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "You finally earned your place in my bed, Ji-hoon."